The Exilary Empire was one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. At its heart stood Princess Vayana Selfar, the most desired yet untouchable woman in the universe. She was known for her unmatched beauty, intelligence, and strict rejection of every suitor who came before her. For years, the greatest warriors, scholars, and noblemen of different species had tried to win her favor. All failed. Some brought rare jewels, others promised planets, but none could capture her interest. The court whispered that no male was worthy of her. Now, another grand event was taking place in the Exilary Palace. Dozens of suitors stood in the throne room, each waiting for their turn to impress the princess. As expected, she remained cold, her golden eyes filled with boredom. But today was different. Among the royal guests, one stood out, not because of his wealth or status, but because he didn't try to impress her at all. His name was Daniel Carter, a human diplomat and former soldier from Earth. He had come for trade negotiations, not for the princess. While the other men stood nervously, preparing their speeches, Daniel simply observed the spectacle with an amused smirk. Vayana noticed him immediately. Unlike the others, he didn't seem eager to speak to her. He wasn't trying to get her attention. In fact, he looked like he couldn't care less. For the first time in years, curiosity sparked in Vayana's mind. "Who is that man?" she asked one of her advisors, keeping her voice neutral. "Daniel Carter, Your Highness, a human representative from the Terran Union." "A human?" Vayana raised an eyebrow. Humans were known for their stubbornness and unpredictability, but she had never spoken to one directly. At that moment, another suitor stepped forward, a prince from a wealthy alien empire. He presented an elaborate speech about how he could offer her a fleet of 1,000 warships. Vayana sighed. No. The prince's face fell in embarrassment. He bowed and left, just like the many before him. Then, for reasons she couldn't explain, Vayana's eyes drifted back to the human. Daniel was still standing calmly, arms crossed, watching the scene as if it was entertainment. She decided to test him. "Summon the human," she ordered. The room went silent. No alien had ever been called before the princess, unless they were presenting an offer. Daniel, however, didn't seem surprised when the guards approached him. He simply shrugged and followed them to the front of the hall. As he stood before her, their eyes met. Unlike the others, Daniel didn't bow. The air in the throne room became heavy. The nobles gasped, waiting for Vayana to react. For the first time in her life, Vayana felt truly challenged. Daniel stood before Princess Vayana Selfar, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. The entire throne room was silent. No one had ever dared to stand in front of the princess without showing respect, fear, or admiration. But this human, he did nothing. Vayana narrowed her golden eyes. "Do you not bow before royalty, human?" Daniel met her gaze without hesitation. "I bow to those I respect, not those I just met." A wave of shocked gasps spread through the court. Did this human not know who she was? Vayana leaned forward on her throne, studying him. Every suitor she had ever met had tried to impress her. They brought gifts, praised her beauty, begged for her attention. But Daniel, he acted as if he didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt something different, curiosity. "You are either very brave or very foolish," she said, tilting her head. "Do you know why I called you here?" Daniel smirked slightly. "Because I'm the only one in this room who isn't drooling over you." A few nobles choked on their drinks. The guards tensed, waiting for the princess's command. Surely, she would punish him for his disrespect. But Vayana laughed. It was a soft, unexpected sound, like a whisper of wind through the palace halls. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough to make everyone freeze. She had never laughed at a suitor before. "I see," she said, her voice calm. "Since you are not interested in me, I have a challenge for you." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "A challenge?" "Yes," she said. "I will offer you a position as my favored guest. You will be given wealth, power, and influence within my empire." She leaned back, watching him closely. "All you have to do is accept." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "Let me guess. Every other man in this room would beg for such an offer." "They would," Vayana confirmed. "Then I'll pass," he said simply. The room fell into absolute silence. No one had ever refused an offer from the princess. Ever. Vayana's expression didn't change, but something flashed in her eyes. She was used to being in control. She was used to people chasing her. But this human, he had just walked away from everything most men desired. Her lips curled into a small smile. "Interesting," she murmured. Daniel turned slightly. "If that's all, Princess, I'll return to my actual purpose here, negotiations." As he walked away, Vayana watched him go, her fingers tapping lightly on her throne. For the first time in her life, she had met a man who didn't try to win her favor. And now, she wanted to know why. For the next few days, Princess Vayana Selfar found herself thinking about the human. It was irritating. Every suitor she had met had tried to impress her. But Daniel Carter, he had rejected her without hesitation. Why? No male had ever ignored her before. No one had ever refused her offers. Yet this human had walked away so easily. She didn't like it. So, she set a trap. A grand royal event was scheduled in the palace, a contest of skill, strength, and intelligence, where nobles and warriors competed for prestige. Vayana made sure Daniel was invited. The night of the event, the palace glowed with golden lights, and the grand hall was filled with warriors, nobles, and diplomats. The air buzzed with excitement. Daniel stood among the guests, watching the contests with mild amusement. He had no interest in impressing anyone, especially not the princess. But Vayana had other plans. She sat on her throne, wearing an elegant dark blue gown embroidered with celestial gold patterns. Her golden eyes scanned the hall, finally settling on Daniel. A sly smile formed on her lips. She raised a hand, and the room fell silent. "For tonight's main event," she announced, "we shall test the strength and intelligence of our guests." Excited murmurs spread through the crowd. These trials were legendary, designed to separate the weak from the strong. Vayana looked directly at Daniel. "I invite the human diplomat, Daniel Carter, to participate." The hall froze. Every noble and warrior turned to stare at Daniel, the human, competing in trials meant for Xilarialites. Daniel sighed, rubbing his neck. "You're not gonna let me enjoy my drink in peace, are you?" Vayana smirked. "Afraid you'll lose." The room filled with soft laughter. Some of the alien nobles chuckled, expecting the human to decline. But Daniel, he grinned. "I never say no to a challenge." The crowd erupted in cheers. The first trial. Strength. Daniel was paired against a Xilari warrior, a massive reptilian alien covered in thick armored scales. Everyone expected Daniel to lose immediately. But the moment the battle began, he moved like lightning, dodging, countering, using speed instead of brute force. Then, a well-timed strike to the warrior's weak spot. The Xilari collapsed, unable to continue. The room fell into stunned silence. Vayana's fingers tightened on her throne. She had expected Daniel to entertain her. She had not expected him to win. And yet, a strange warmth spread through her. For the first time in her life, she was impressed. The grand hall was silent. Every noble, warrior, and guest stared in disbelief. Daniel Carter, a human, had won. The Xilari warrior lay on the ground, groaning in pain. He was twice Daniel's size, covered in thick scales, and yet the human had defeated him with ease. For a moment, even Princess Vayana Selfar was speechless. She had invited Daniel into this contest to humiliate him, to remind him that, no matter how confident he was still just a human. But now, she felt something unexpected, a thrill. Daniel stood in the arena, rolling his shoulders as if the fight had been nothing more than an inconvenience. He wasn't even tired, Then he did something that sent a spark of irritation and curiosity through Vayana. He turned his head slightly toward her throne and smirked. It wasn't a smirk of arrogance. It wasn't a desperate attempt to impress her. It was the smirk of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Vayana's grip on her throne tightened. A new challenge. Vayana refused to let one victory change the game. She leaned forward and clapped slowly. "Well done, human," she said, her voice smooth and unreadable. "Perhaps you are not as weak as I assumed." Daniel chuckled. "You assumed wrong." The crowd gasped. No one ever spoke to the princess like that. Vayana's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then let's see if you are more than just a brute." She gestured, and a new challenge was announced, a test of intelligence. Daniel was placed against an elite Xilari strategist, a scholar known for solving complex battle simulations in record time. The challenge: a holographic war simulation where both contestants had to outmaneuver the enemy fleet. The court whispered among themselves. This time, surely, the human would fail. The game began. The mind of a human. Daniel studied the simulation screen, eyes sharp and focused. His opponent moved quickly and efficiently, setting up defenses and counterattacks. But Daniel, he did something unexpected. Instead of playing safe, he took risks. His fleet moved unpredictably. He sacrificed ships in ways that made no sense until they did. Every move looked reckless, but in the end, it created an unstoppable strategy. And just like that, Daniel won again. The Xilari scholar stared at the screen in disbelief. The nobles whispered furiously. How was this possible? How could a human outthink a Xilari strategist? Vayana, however, wasn't whispering. She was staring at Daniel, her golden eyes unreadable. This human was more than she had expected. Much more. And for the first time in her life, Princess Vayana didn't know if she was the one playing the game, or if she was the one being played. For the rest of the evening, Princess Vayana, Selthar, remained silent. She watched Daniel from her throne, observing him like a predator watching its prey. But was he really prey? He had won both challenges, not by luck, but through skill, intelligence, and confidence. And worst of all, he still wasn't impressed by her. The men who came before him would have been begging for her approval by now. They would have fallen to their knees, desperate for a single glance, a single word from her lips. But Daniel, he was laughing with the other warriors, drinking, and completely ignoring her. It irritated her. It intrigued her. Vayana knew she had to do something. She had to test him again. And this time, it would be a test he couldn't refuse. The proposal. The next day, Vayana summoned Daniel to her private chamber. It was an honor few had ever received. Many nobles would have killed for such an invitation. Daniel, however, walked in as if it was just another meeting. He crossed his arms. "Princess, you wanted to see me." Vayana leaned back in her throne, eyes unreadable. She wasn't smiling. "I am traveling to the outer colonies in 3 days," she said. "I require someone capable to accompany me." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You have an entire army at your command. Why me?" Vayana tilted her head slightly. "Because you are different." She expected him to take the bait. Instead, Daniel just chuckled. "Sounds risky. What's the real reason?" For the first time in her life, Vayana found herself hesitating. What was the real reason? Because she wanted to test him again. Because she wanted to see if he could still surprise her. Or was it something deeper? She shook the thought away. "Do you accept or not?" Daniel studied her for a moment. Then he smirked. "I accept." Vayana didn't know why, but her heart skipped a beat. A deadly turn. 3 days later, the royal convoy left for the outer colonies. Vayana and Daniel sat across from each other in her personal transport, tension filling the space between them. "I assume this is just another test?" Daniel asked, amused. Vayana met his gaze. "Perhaps. Before he could reply, alarms blared. The ship shook violently. Suddenly, the control panel lit up, hostile ships approaching. Vaiana's eyes widened. They were under attack. Daniel's smirk disappeared. He moved instantly, grabbing his weapon and preparing for battle. As the ship trembled, Vaiana realized something strange. For the first time in her life, she felt afraid. And for the first time, she felt something else, too. Relief that Daniel was by her side. The royal transport shook violently as alarms blared through the cabin. Vaiana's golden eyes flickered with shock and frustration. This was supposed to be a controlled mission, a test for Daniel, not a real battle for survival. Yet here they were, under attack by unknown assailants. Her guards rushed to secure the ship, but before they could react, Daniel was already moving. He grabbed a pulse rifle from the emergency weapon rack and checked its charge with calm efficiency. "Who's attacking us?" he asked, eyes sharp. Vaiana clenched her fists. "Pirates. Assassins. I don't know yet." Daniel smirked despite the chaos. "Great. I was starting to get bored. The battle begins." The ship lurched again, throwing some guards off balance. Enemy vessels circled them like hungry beasts, their weapons charging. A voice crackled through the comms. "Princess Vaiana, surrender now, and we may spare your life." Vaiana's eyes narrowed. Whoever these enemies were, they had planned this well. But she was no coward. She stood, her voice cold and powerful. "You will regret this." Daniel sighed. "I was hoping you'd say something cooler." She glared at him, but before she could respond, the first blast hit. The ship's shields flickered, and the room filled with sparks. The guards rushed to the defense turrets, but the enemy was too fast, too precise. Vaiana felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Uncertainty. And then, Daniel was at her side. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the escape pods. "We need to move," he said firmly. "I'm not running." Vaiana snapped. Daniel leaned closer, his voice low. "We're not running. We're surviving." Something about the way he said it sent a strange shiver through her. For the first time in her life, someone was protecting her, not because she was royalty, but because they wanted to. She hated how much that made her trust him. Escape and survival. The royal ship shook again, a second explosion rocking its hull. Daniel took control, leading her and a few guards toward a secondary shuttle. "Board now," he ordered. Vaiana hesitated. She wasn't used to following orders. But there was something about Daniel, his confidence, his certainty, that made her move without question. As they launched the escape shuttle, the main ship exploded behind them. Vaiana stared in shock. Her royal transport, her symbol of power, was gone. Daniel's voice pulled her back. "Focus, princess. We're not safe yet." She turned to him. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. And yet, as she looked at Daniel, she realized something even more shocking. She didn't mind it. The escape shuttle shot through the blackness of space, its engines roaring as it raced away from the wreckage of the royal ship. The stars outside seemed far too calm compared to the chaos they had just escaped. Vaiana sat in the shuttle's small cockpit, her hands tightly gripping the seat. The explosion of her ship was still fresh in her mind, and a deep, unsettling feeling gnawed at her. She had always been in control, always the one who made the decisions, but now she had lost everything. The royal transport, her power, her empire, had been destroyed in a single strike. She wasn't even sure how she felt about it. But when her gaze flickered to Daniel, something shifted inside her. He was at the controls, his brow furrowed with concentration. His face, usually so relaxed, now showed a quiet intensity. Despite the danger, despite the destruction, Daniel had stayed calm. He hadn't panicked. He hadn't hesitated. And for the first time since they'd met, Vaiana was thankful for his presence. "Are we safe?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. Daniel glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "For now." Vayana nodded, her thoughts racing. She had never allowed herself to depend on anyone. As a princess, she was untouchable, independent, and the weight of her responsibilities had always been hers to bear alone. But right now, she realized something. She needed him, and it terrified her. A moment of weakness. As the shuttle coasted through space, the tension between them thickened. Vayana couldn't help but wonder about the strange pull she felt toward Daniel. He wasn't like the other men who had tried to win her favor with flattery and gifts. He didn't chase after her. He didn't care about her royal title. He treated her like a person, not a princess. She found herself drawn to that. For the first time, she could see that humility, something she had never known, was a quality she had always craved, though she had never admitted it to herself. She had always prided herself on her strength, her ability to stand alone, but now she realized how lonely that had made her. And Daniel, despite being the human, had made her feel seen, heard, and important. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind, to call her out, to challenge her. And that, more than anything, made her realize that maybe she had been wrong about everything. The quiet truth. As the hours passed, the shuttle drifted toward a nearby asteroid belt. They couldn't stay in open space too long. The enemy ships might still be hunting them, and they needed to find a place to lay low. Vayana couldn't remain silent any longer. She turned to Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you stay with me?" Daniel didn't look at her right away. He continued adjusting the shuttle systems, his hands moving with practiced ease. After a moment, he answered, his voice calm. "Because you needed me." Vayana blinked, a sharp pain shooting through her chest. "What do you mean?" Daniel finally turned to her, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You've always been the one in charge. Everyone worships you. But who do you have when things go wrong? Who do you trust?" Her breath caught in her throat. The words hit harder than she expected. "I never needed anyone," she said softly. "I never thought I did." Daniel's gaze softened. "I think you're starting to realize that you don't always have to be alone." The words hung in the air between them. Vayana could feel the weight of them, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to deny them. Daniel was right. She did need him. She had never allowed herself to acknowledge it before, but now, the truth was undeniable. Her walls were beginning to crumble, slowly but surely. And as she looked at Daniel, she realized that maybe it was okay to let them fall. The asteroid belt loomed ahead, its jagged rocks drifting lazily in the vast emptiness of space. It was the perfect hiding spot, difficult to track, full of natural cover. As Daniel piloted the shuttle deeper into the maze of rocks, Vayana felt the tension in her chest finally begin to ease. They were safe, for now. But despite the relative peace, her thoughts were in turmoil. The events of the past few days, the destruction of her ship, the sudden feeling of vulnerability, and above all, Daniel's unexpected role in all of it, were starting to wear away the walls she had carefully built around her heart. She had always been the untouchable princess, surrounded by suitors who saw only her power and beauty. Yet here was a man who had never cared for her title or her wealth. Daniel had simply treated her like a person, like a woman with flaws, with real feelings. That had changed everything. The silence in the shuttle stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Vayana turned her gaze toward him, watching him guide the shuttle through the asteroid field with calm precision. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't afraid of her. In fact, it almost seemed like he was more interested in seeing her as she truly was. "I've been thinking," she began softly, her voice almost lost in the hum of the shuttle's engines. "About what?" Daniel asked, his eyes still focused on the controls. "About what you said." She hesitated, then continued. "About needing someone." Daniel finally glanced at her, his expression neutral but his eyes kind. "What about it?" She took a deep breath, gathering the courage to speak her truth. "I think I'm starting to understand what you meant." Daniel's gaze softened. "I wasn't trying to make you feel weak, Vayana. I see a side of you that no one else does. You don't have to carry the weight of everything alone." Her heart pounded, and for the first time, she didn't feel embarrassed or ashamed of the vulnerability in her chest. She had always thought that being strong meant shutting everyone out, but now she realized that true strength might actually lie in allowing someone else to stand beside her. She swallowed hard, trying to find the words that had eluded her for so long. I've never trusted anyone like I trust you." Daniel's expression softened even more. He finally let go of the controls and faced her. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready for. But I'm here, Vayana, for whatever you need." She nodded, feeling a wave of emotion she hadn't expected. The princess who had ruled over an empire, who had rejected every suitor, now found herself relying on someone who saw her as more than just a princess. "Thank you," she whispered. The shuttle drifted silently in the vast expanse, the stars outside their only company. It was in this quiet moment that Vayana realized something profound. For the first time, she wasn't afraid to let someone in. And as the days passed, she knew that this wasn't just a fleeting moment or a simple partnership. It was the beginning of something greater, something worth more than titles, more than power. It was a connection born out of trust, respect, and something even more powerful, love. Vayana smiled at Daniel, the warmth in her heart undeniable. Maybe, just maybe, this human was the one who could teach her that there was more to life than ruling an empire. There was life, real life, in simply being human. And she was ready to embrace it. The days in hiding passed in a blur of quiet conversation, strategy, and silent glances shared between Vayana and Daniel. They moved cautiously through the asteroid belt, carefully avoiding detection while they planned their next steps. In the quiet, Vayana began to realize just how much she had come to rely on Daniel's calm, unwavering presence. Though she had always prided herself on her independence, she found herself needing him more than she had ever expected. She watched him, often in silence, as he worked, his hands steady, his voice reassuring, and his mind always focused on their survival. He wasn't like the men she had known, those who had sought to impress her, to take from her. Daniel wasn't interested in her power or her title. He had simply seen her, the real her, and it made her feel something she had never felt before. The moment of truth. One evening, as they sat together in the small shuttle cabin, Vayana found herself struggling with the same thoughts that had plagued her since the moment Daniel had first rejected her royal offers. She had been untouchable for so long. No one had ever made her feel vulnerable. But now, with Daniel at her side, it was impossible to ignore the growing warmth in her chest, the pull toward him. She turned to him, her voice quieter than usual. "Daniel." He looked up, his expression soft but alert. "What's wrong?" Vayana hesitated. She had never been one to beg, to ask for anything from anyone. But now, with everything she had lost, with everything she had come to care about, she felt an overwhelming need to say the words that had been building inside her. I don't want to be alone anymore." Her voice wavered slightly, but she didn't look away. She couldn't. She had never let herself show this side of her. But now, she realized it was the only way to move forward. Daniel's gaze softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand. "You're not alone, Vayana. I'm right here." But Vayana shook her head, feeling something more, something that needed to be said. "I mean it, Daniel. I need you, not just for survival, not just for protection. I need you, in every way." Daniel's hand tightened around hers, and for a moment, there was silence. Vayana could feel her heart pounding in her chest. It felt like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't control, but for the first time in her life, she didn't care. She wasn't the princess anymore. She wasn't the ruler of an empire. She was simply a woman who needed the man beside her, a man who had stood by her side when everything else had crumbled. A silent promise. Daniel took a deep breath, his expression unreadable for a moment. But then his eyes softened, and he gently cupped her face in his hands. "Vayana," he began, his voice low, filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "You've never had to ask for anyone's attention before, but I've never been in this for your title. I've been here for you." His words, simple and honest, filled her heart with warmth. The walls she had built for so long had crumbled, and for the first time, she let herself feel the truth. "I'm here too, Daniel," she whispered. "And I don't want to lose you." His lips curved into a small smile, one that didn't mock or tease, but instead spoke of understanding. "You won't." As he leaned closer, Vayana felt something shift between them, something stronger than attraction or desire. It was trust, and in that moment, it was everything. The princess, once untouchable and proud, had learned that even the strongest of people needed someone to lean on. And for her, that person was the human who had shown her what it truly meant to live, to love, and to let go of the past. Their eyes met, and in the quiet of the shuttle, their world narrowed to just the two of them. No titles, no empires, just two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. For the first time in her life, Vayana HFY felt at peace. And as Daniel's lips met hers, she knew that no matter what came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The shuttle continued its slow journey through the asteroid belt, its engines humming quietly in the silence. The danger that had once loomed over them seemed distant now, as if it belonged to another time, another world. For Vayana, the world had shifted. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the ruler of an empire, untouchable and isolated. Now, sitting next to Daniel, she felt human. She felt connected. As the days passed in their secluded hideout, the bond between them grew. Every conversation, every shared glance, only deepened their understanding of each other. The more time Vayana spent with Daniel, the more she realized that the life she had known before, the life of a princess, alone in her castle of expectations, was not what she wanted anymore. She had never allowed herself to truly need anyone, but now she couldn't imagine a life without Daniel by her side. One evening, as the stars outside twinkled like 1,000 secrets, Daniel turned to her, his face more serious than she had seen it in days. "We can't stay here forever," he said, his voice low. Vayana's heart sank. She had known this day would come. The asteroid belt had been a temporary haven, but they couldn't remain hidden forever. Their enemies would eventually find them. The question wasn't if, but when. "I know," she replied quietly, her gaze drifting to the window. "But I don't want to leave this place. Not yet." Daniel reached out, gently taking her hand. His touch was warm, reassuring, and it grounded her in a way she hadn't felt before. "I don't want to leave either, but we need to face what's coming. Together." Vayana looked into his eyes. There was no fear there, only a steady determination. And that was what she needed. She had always been alone in her struggles, always facing the weight of the universe on her shoulders. But now she had someone who was willing to stand beside her, who wasn't afraid of her title, her past, or the enemies who threatened them. "I can't go back to being just a princess," she said softly. "Not after everything I've learned. Not after knowing you." Daniel smiled, a small but genuine smile. "You're not just a princess, Vayana. You're so much more than that. And I don't care about your title. I care about you." Vayana's chest tightened at his words. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever seen her as she truly was. And now, as she looked at Daniel, she realized that this was where she belonged. Not in a palace of gold and marble, but here, with him, in this moment. As the shuttle continued its journey toward an uncertain future, Vayana knew one thing for certain. She had found something worth more than all the power and wealth in the universe. She had found love. And for the first time in her life, she was ready to face whatever came next, together with Daniel. No empire, no title, no fear could stand between them now.